Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Tree podcast. I'm Kavita, a trainer and reading specialist at Tree. And I'm here with my colleague Aishwarya, who is also a trainer and someone who has worked with children for many years, especially in the primary space. So, during our discussions at Tree around curriculum and curriculum development, we have been asking ourselves what makes a holistic, well rounded curriculum. And one of the things that came up was the importance of play and art in the early years, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So, to dive right in, Aishwarya, what do you think the role of play and art is in the curriculum today?
Thank you, Kavita. I think talking about play, it's important to first acknowledge that play and learning are not separate at all. They're not contradictory. They pretty much complement each other. In fact, even in Montessori learning, they talk about play as the work of the child, and it's seen as a form of serious learning itself. So it's not considered separate from learning at all. It's considered as learning itself. Play is learning for especially in early childhood. And even if we do look at the benefits of play, it really helps in building cognitive skills. It builds empathy within children and their social skills as they kind of progress to the developmental stage of playing with each other. It improves their communication skills and language skills, and also builds on a lot of fine and gross motor skills that we're especially working with learners in early childhood spaces. Even with regard to art, I think art has the ability to improve children's imagination. And I think imagination in general is that ability to see beyond what is already there. So it helps children kind of explore those new ideas and concepts. And again, much like play, builds children's creative and cognitive and social skills as well.
Great, I agree. And I think the idea that play and art are as important and valuable a part of the curriculum as, say, literacy and numeracy. And also the idea that it's important for us to make sure that these activities are a purposeful, planned, and intentional part of the curriculum. So, taking off from there, I think it's important for us to explore how we can make play and art a purposeful and intentional part of the curriculum. So, what do you suggest? What are some of the ideas you would suggest to the teachers?
Um, I think it's important to include different types of play in our children's routine, whether it's solitary play or parallel play. Even if it's just children building blocks through building play or through role plays, which they tend to play with kitchen sets and doctor sets and different types of costumes. Giving them opportunities, especially in really young and early childhood children, for sensory play through sensory terms, and a lot of opportunity and space for outdoor play as well, because children do really thrive from a lot of physical play. It's I think also important for us to keep in mind the different developmental stages that children do go through, and for us as teachers to be aware and understand these stages to help our students in their interactions as well as their explorations. For example, if we're going back to the different types of play that we were talking about, children at a certain age tend to engage a lot more with the solitary play first, and then they slowly progress into parallel play, which is basically two children playing in the same room, but then they play separately. And then only after this stage, they usually tend to then progress into work playing with a group or more collaboratively. So I think just being aware of these basic developmental stages will really help us as teachers as well. And similarly in art as well, that scribble that children tend to initially do on paper or with a sketch pen or with a crayon isn't merely just a random mark or like a scribble that they do on paper or like it's kind of looked upon as a critical for their development as well, and as a step towards shape formation, and it can be taken as also a way of them expressing their own visual and spatial understanding. So I think as teachers, it's important for us to plan the environment that we're providing for our children and to also provide them with some rich and just some necessary resources that they need in order to enable this.
Yeah, some great ideas, I think. And I want to just expand a little bit about the idea of guided and free play. So, if we were thinking about guided play as being play where the teacher gives more direction to the child, um, And whereas free play is when a child is free to do what he or she wants and is not really passively responding to any directions. I know in one of the workshops, our teachers expressed it quite beautifully when they said that free play usually does not have a specific definite end product, whereas a guided play usually has a more defined end product. So I think the importance of ensuring that in our classrooms there is a good balance of both free play and guided play, because each has its own value, is really important when we are thinking about our curriculum and our daily routines. And just talking about the whole idea of product, can you tell us a little bit more about the importance of the whole process versus product part of play and art?
Yeah, I think absolutely. Just like you mentioned, like, guided play usually does have a particular product that you're using for. So I think when we also talking about product-oriented learning, it's pretty similar that we're expecting a certain outcome from the task. And as teachers, we tend to be more focused on what is it that the children are creating rather than how they're creating that or how they're engaging in that process, which I think then leads us to process-based learning, which is more focused on how they're completing the particular task, and the focus isn't really on what they create. So it's not on the product per se, but more on the learning that the process brings about.
Yeah, I think it's so important that we kind of reflect on this, because I think there is a tendency generally for us to put more of an emphasis on the end product, when we forget that the process can actually be really important and tell us a lot about where the kids are at, the journey that they're on, and the kind of skills that we need to focus on to help them grow.
Yeah, I think that said, it's also important to acknowledge that it's not to say that product-oriented learning is bad or that it shouldn't be implemented in a classroom. I think it also has its own benefits, that it is very useful in teaching children certain types of skills. And a lot of times just product-oriented learning is then useful for children to engage in a process-based learning. So it's not to completely write off its benefits as well. As teachers, I think it's important for us to kind of acknowledge and remember which process, as rather which method we want to use, how much of, and how we want to kind of use both methods for our students.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like we said before, free play and guided play, it's about finding a balance between both and making sure that we give emphasis to both the product as well as the process, and not just one of them.
Absolutely.
Yes, and speaking of our tendency as teachers to do certain things, I want to talk a little bit about the role of teachers in art and play. What are some of the roles that you see a teacher play in these activities?
I think on the top of my head, the first important role that teachers do play is just merely observing. I think for us as teachers, because we tend to be so hands-on with students, sometimes it becomes very difficult for us to take a step back and just observe. But it's very, very important for us to spend that time in the day to just sit back and observe what our students are doing, especially when they engage in play and in art. And when we're observing, there's certain things we can keep in mind. It's important to observe how students interact with each other and how they're communicating, whether verbally or non-verbally, how they react to different situations, their emotions then do come out. And just by observing, I think it gives us as teachers a lot of information into students' strengths, their weaknesses, what they're interested in as well. Apart from that, I think it's also, as teachers, it's important for us to redirect undesired behavior. And what we mean by that, I think, is that, for example, if there's a lot of children fighting for a chance to go on, let's say, a merry-go-round during outdoor play, it's not for us as teachers to then step in or intervene at that point and say, no, you're not fighting, this is not okay. But then kind of how do we redirect that behavior in a way for children? So as teachers, we can then maybe take on a role to make this into role play and then tell children to imagine that the merry-go-round is sort of a spaceship, and that they're all going to get chances to get on in one particular space center and then get off in another. So that's kind of a way to redirect it, where we're taking their mind off of what was happening and then help them engage in guided imaginary play.
Yeah, I think it's so important, the idea of the role of the teacher being to join the children in the play rather than tell them what to do. but just joining in with them and in the process redirecting behavior and play. And I think another important role would be just the kind of questions that we ask while the children are engaged in play or in art. And being mindful of asking questions that maybe tell us a lot more about what the child is doing, why they're doing it, the process behind their thinking, rather than telling them how to do something. So I think just being mindful of those questions is another important role that teachers can play. So yeah, I think thank you, Aishwarya. I think that was a good discussion. I hope it gives our listeners a few ideas and strategies that they can kind of take back into the classroom and just rethink the whole idea of play and art not being extracurricular activities really, but a very valuable and important part of the daily curriculum of the child. And hopefully there are some things that we can all go back and think about and try and include in our classroom spaces.
Thank you, Kavita. I think this will definitely, like you said, I hope this will be a helpful conversation for teachers to also think further about.
Thank you.
Thank you.